You take a standardized test, a score pops out, and society basically points at that 2-digit or maybe 3-digit number and says, well, there it is. That is exactly how smart you are.
Right, yeah.
There's this expectation of almost engineering level precision when we try to measure human ability, like high score, low score. It feels clean. It feels objective.
It's comforting, honestly.
Exactly. It's comforting because it just neatly categorizes everyone into this nice little hierarchy.
Yeah, it creates a very tidy illusion of certainty, right? Because we prefer our reality to be highly quantified and visible.
We really do. But the moment you step back and actually look at human behavior, like the incredibly messy reality of how we navigate relationships or solve unpredictable problems or, I don't know, even just make it through a Tuesday, that precision scale completely shatters.
Oh, completely. It just falls apart.
The landscape of human potential is not a neat spreadsheet. It is murky, it's unpredictable, and the way we currently measure it just leaves so many people feeling, honestly, fundamentally misunderstood. So today on this deep dive, we are tossing that broken scale straight into the trash. We're replacing that whole exhausting smart versus not smart debate with a framework called the cognitive architecture model.
Which is such a fascinating source to dig into. Because this model, it basically demands that we look at human ability through a completely different lens.
Yeah.
One that really challenges our deepest, most ingrained assumptions about how intelligence actually develops and how it's expressed. It moves us away from all that judgment and towards a much, much deeper understanding of the mechanics of the mind.
And for you listening, if you have ever, beat yourself up over your own anxiety or maybe felt like a failure because you didn't thrive in a very specific environment, this framework is going to be incredibly forgiving.
It really is.
Because the core concept here, right out of the gate, is that cognition is not this single, isolated capacity. We have to completely abandon the concept of a monolithic IQ.
Right, exactly. In this model, cognitive architecture doesn't just mean your ability to solve a math equation or memorize historical facts. It encompasses literally every single information processing function that's involved in how you perceive and interact with reality.
So we're talking about, visual and auditory perception, spatial awareness, language processing.
Emotional regulation, yeah.
Yeah.
But it goes even deeper into biological processing, too.
Oh, right, like proprioception.
Yes. Proprioception, which is knowing where your limbs are in space without actually looking at them. That is cognition.
Wow, okay.
And interoception, which is your internal bodily awareness, like feeling your heartbeat, the sensation of hunger, or, the tightening of your stomach when you're stressed. All of that counts as cognition in this framework.
Yeah.
It is all just data being processed by the system.
Which is wild because we have this super ingrained habit of isolating these abilities. Like, we'll look at someone and say, oh, they have a real gift for music, or, they're really emotionally intelligent.
As if those traits just live in these little vacuum-sealed jars in the brain.
Exactly. Like, they're completely separate. But this framework insists that these functions are continuously influencing each other, right? They form this one massively integrated structure.
Yeah, trying to explain human ability through a single cognitive function it's like trying to explain how a car drives by only talking about the steering wheel.
Right.
It just doesn't work.
Oh.
Some cognitive processes literally serve as the foundational support for others. Certain really high-level abilities only emerge because multiple underlying systems are interacting flawlessly.
So if one system crashes, it drags the others down.
Exactly. Like, if your emotional regulation system is suddenly flooded by panic, your spatial cognition might degrade in real time.
Oh, wow.
Which is exactly why people often get physically lost or completely disoriented when they're terrified. The systems are inextricably linked.
That makes so much sense. It kind of makes me think of how we usually visualize our own intelligence, almost like a video game character sheet.
Oh yeah, the RPG stats.
Yeah. You look at your stats and you're like, okay, I have a 15 in intelligence, an 8 in charisma, a 12 in perception, just these fixed numerical attributes that you carry around in your pocket.
Right, right.
But this architecture model, it feels much more like a city's infrastructure. It's not about counting how many buildings or cognitive functions you have. It's about how the roads, the plumbing, and the power grids actually connect them.
That's a great way to put it.
Ability basically emerges from the entire city functioning together, from the flow of traffic and resources, not just from one wealthy neighborhood,
I love that city infrastructure analogy because it highlights a really vital caveat of this entire framework.
Which is?
The structure itself is completely invisible to us.
Well,
we can never directly observe another person's cognitive architecture. We can't even directly observe our own. We only ever see the outputs.
Right, the behavior.
Exactly. We see behavior, speech, physical movement, how fast someone learns, the art they make. We are constantly inferring the layout of those hidden roads based entirely on where we see the cars ending up.
Okay, so if cognition is this invisible infrastructure, what actually powers it? Because biologically speaking, a city needs a power plant, right? The brain only has so much energy to actually run the grid.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. Human beings are finite biological systems.
Right.
The brain consumes about 20% of the body's energy, but there is an absolute ceiling on the glucose and oxygen available at any given millisecond.
A hard cap.
A hard cap. Because our biology is finite, our cognitive resources are finite.
Wow.
So the huge paradigm shift here is that the vast differences we see in people's abilities, it might not actually be about who has the biggest power plant.
It's about where the power goes.
Exactly. It's far more about how those finite resources are being allocated across that city grid.
So, wait, two people could have the exact same amount of total cognitive fuel, but look completely different from the outside just because of where the fuel is pumped.
Yes. Even with identical total resources, dramatically different abilities will emerge depending on that distribution. And this fundamentally redefines how we view individuals that we typically label as geniuses.
Oh, right. Because rather than possessing this globally superior God-tier brain, a genius might simply have a structural architecture where a disproportionately massive amount of their finite resources naturally concentrated into one specific domain.
Precisely. If 90% of your city's funding goes directly to the science and engineering district, you're going to produce incredible technological breakthroughs.
But your parks department and your sanitation grid might be completely abandoned.
Yeah, that intense specialization almost always comes at a steep cost to other functions.
Yeah.
It's a structural bias. It's just how their cognitive architecture naturally developed and organized itself.
Right.
And conversely, individuals, we might call it generalists, they have resources distributed much more evenly across a lot of domains.
So they might not exhibit that extreme world-shaking specialization in one specific area.
Right. But they gain a much greater degree of resilience and adaptability when the environment changes.
I have to pause here, though, because this specific idea, it kind of challenges a very deeply held cultural belief about, earning our success.
It really does, yeah.
Like, if a genius didn't necessarily earn their brilliance through sheer willpower and endless grit, but rather they just sort of won a neurological resource allocation lottery, doesn't that sort of diminish the value of hard work?
Well, the interaction is definitely more complex than a simple lottery, though the baseline structural bias is a reality. Environmental influences, dedicated practice, life experiences, they all play massive roles in developing those pathways.
Right. A heavily funded science district still requires the actual scientists to show up and do the work.
Exactly. However, extreme ability fundamentally starts with that natural infrastructure bias. The roads were already paved and widened toward that specific domain before the environment even began demanding traffic.
I see.
Hard work optimizes the existing architecture, but it doesn't magically build an entirely new power plant.
Okay, that makes sense. But if resources are heavily concentrated in some areas, we really have to look at what happens to the areas that get left out. Like if the energy is all routed to abstract thought, something else is losing power.
Right. And that dynamic introduces this concept in the source material of subjectively open and closed cognitive domains.
Open and closed.
Yeah. Because resources are strictly finite, some areas of perception will appear vividly open to a person, while others remain entirely closed.
But a closed domain doesn't mean the person is broken, right?
Right.
Or that their sensory organs are failing.
Not at all. The information is still entering the nervous system. The brain is definitely receiving the data. But within the person's current resource allocation, that information simply doesn't emerge as a conscious, meaningful experience.
So the data is there, it's just not being lit up.
Exactly. Interoception, which we mentioned earlier, is a perfect example of this. Your internal bodily sensations, like the microscopic movements of your digestion, the exact rhythm of your resting heart rate, the subtle expansion of your rib cage, they're continuously generating data.
Right.
The information is flowing into the nervous system every single second of your life.
Yet, for many people functioning in a high-stress modern world, they are completely unaware of these sensations.
It's just a closed domain.
Exactly. The architecture has routed power away from internal monitoring so it can deal with external stressors like emails, traffic, social dynamics.
But those domains can open up, right? Like
Mm.
people who start practicing meditation or biofeedback, or even individuals who undergo a massive physical change, they often report that sensations that seemed entirely non-existent suddenly become incredibly vivid.
Yeah, exactly. And they didn't grow new nerve endings. Right. The previously existing information simply became accessible because the cognitive organization shifted.
The city rerouted power to a Darth neighborhood.
Yes. And this fluid reallocation brings us to a really critical formula from the text for understanding how we actually perform in the real world.
Yes, the equation. Ability equals cognitive architecture multiplied by environment.
Multiplied by environment.
Yes, human ability simply does not exist independently of its context.
Huh.
A structure that works flawlessly in one setting might fail catastrophically in another.
It's like, think of a highly specialized, world-class Formula One race car.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. It is an engineering marvel, fine-tuned for speed, aerodynamics. That car represents a highly specialized cognitive architecture. Now, you put that car on a freshly paved, pristine racetrack, the ideal environment, and it breaks world records.
It's like a mechanical genius.
Exactly. But take that exact same car with the exact same brilliant engineering and drop it into a muddy, deeply rutted off-road swamp.
It's going to get stuck immediately.
Immediate.
The tires aren't built for mud. The suspension is way too low to clear the ruts, and the sheer power of the engine is just going to dig the car deeper into the dirt.
Right. And the car didn't suddenly become a bad car. It didn't lose its underlying brilliance. It is just a massive environmental mismatch.
Right.
The architecture of the F1 car multiplied by the swamp environment equals zero ability to move forward.
Performance is entirely dependent on that intersection. But, an F1 car stuck in a swamp doesn't just sit there quietly.
No, it doesn't.
The driver hits the gas, the engine revs to its absolute limit, the tires spin violently, and the whole machine overheats while literally going nowhere.
Yeah.
And that internal friction generates outputs, which perfectly illustrates the internal experience of cognitive mismatch.
And those internal outputs are what the model calls cognitive noise.
Yes, cognitive noise.
We're talking about processes that continuously consume mental resources without moving the car forward. Anxiety, chronic rumination, excessive self-evaluation, those intrusive looping thoughts about a past mistake. For so many people, these processes are just constantly running in the background, drawing massive amounts of power from the grid.
And culturally, we really tend to pathologize this.
Oh, totally.
We view anxiety and rumination as a pathogen, a flaw, or a broken gear in the brain that needs to be surgically removed. But the framework of this model is radically neutral regarding these states.
Neutral.
Yes. Cognitive noise is not categorized as bad or unnecessary cognition.
Okay, I have to be honest. That is a really tough pill to swallow when you're the one actually suffering through a panic attack or lying awake at 3 a.m. replaying a conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels inherently bad.
The suffering it causes is very real. And if it produces functional difficulties, those consequences obviously deserve compassionate care and intervention.
Right.
But the model views the noise itself simply as an observable pattern of cognitive output. It is the natural, predictable result of an individual's specific cognitive architecture attempting to process an environment it is not optimized for.
So the spinning tires and the overheating engine are not a moral failing of the car.
Exactly. They are just the mechanical reality of a low-clearance vehicle in a swamp. The noise shouldn't be judged as a deduction of the person's inherent value.
It's just the engine running hot based on the conditions.
Yes.
Which really takes the shame right out of the equation. You aren't broken. Your system is just consuming resources trying to solve an environmental puzzle.
Right. And the system can also spontaneously change how it handles that friction through a phenomenon called brain cancellation.
Brain cancellation, that sounds kind of intense.
It does, but it basically represents a structural shift where there is a natural sudden reduction in that unnecessary cognitive output. The system detects the inefficiency of the spinning tires and cuts power to them.
It sounds like your brain just shuts off, but it's actually a massive reallocation of energy, right? The resources that were being violently consumed by rumination or social anxiety are suddenly freed up.
Exactly. Think of a high-stress corporate lawyer who spends their entire week trapped in this loop of cognitive noise, worrying about cases, fearing judgment, constantly self-evaluating.
Right.
Then, on the weekend, they go rock climbing. Halfway up a sheer cliff face, the rumination completely vanishes.
Oh, wow.
The brain hasn't shut down. Rather, the physical danger and the intense spatial demands of the climbing wall force the architecture to reroute all available power to visual perception, motor control, and immediate problem solving.
Because the power grid literally cannot afford to keep the anxiety department running while trying to keep the body from falling off a cliff.
Exactly. The noise is canceled because the resources were fiercely demanded elsewhere.
So the energy becomes available for direct observation and profound presence.
Yes, the underlying mechanisms of how this shift occurs permanently are complex, obviously, but we can observe it in daily life as a fluid redistribution of our finite bandwidth.
Man, if our internal resources are constantly shifting based on context,
Mhm.
and our observable abilities are just whatever outputs happen to be funded at this exact second, it really makes you question the nature of potential.
It really does.
Like, what about the abilities we aren't currently showing? The parts of the city that are powered down?
Well, unexpressed cognitive resources remain entirely unknown to the outside observer, but the unseen is absolutely not non-existent.
Right.
Capacities that are currently absent from someone's observable behavior should never be permanently written off as missing. They are merely dormant.
Because, like, just because the F1 car isn't hitting 200 miles per hour in the swamp doesn't mean it lacks a top speed.
Exactly.
It just means the current formula architecture multiplied by environment isn't allowing that specific capacity to emerge.
Yes, we might be looking at a profound environmental mismatch, a lack of specific experiential triggers, or the architecture might be waiting for a new combination of cognitive processes to mature before a new amenity unlocks.
Right.
What we observe in ourselves, or in anyone else, is really only a temporary relative output within a highly specific context.
It's just a momentary snapshot.
Just a snapshot.
Hmm.
Never the totality of a person's cognitive potential. Dormant abilities can emerge seemingly out of nowhere through a change in environment, a new learning paradigm, or even biological shifts as we age.
Which begs the question, if our abilities and our observable behaviors are always shifting, reacting, and reallocating, how do we even define who we are?
That's the big question.
Right, because we get fed this constant stream of self-help advice telling us to, find our true self, as if there's a perfect optimized version of our brain just hiding under the floorboards.
And the model strips away that pressure entirely.
Really?
Yeah. It argues that the goal of life is not to discover a pure cognition or to somehow evolve into a flawless version of yourself.
Right.
The architecture you had 10 years ago experienced reality sincerely based on the resources it had. The present you is doing the exact same thing. There is no fake version of your cognition.
It's all just the architecture you have right now interacting with the room you are standing in.
Exactly.
The Soars actually has a great way to visualize self-expression under this model, which is to think of yourself as a translator.
Yes, the translator analogy.
Because human beings cannot directly communicate raw cognition. I cannot literally hand you my internal architecture so you can feel my exact emotional resonance or see my exact spatial reasoning.
No, we're entirely trapped inside our unseen cities.
Right, I am trapped. So to communicate with you, I have to translate my internal state into socially understandable language, facial expressions, and behaviors.
We are constantly compressing our vast, complex internal data into a very narrow bandwidth of external behavior so that others can perceive us.
True self-expression, then, isn't about achieving some higher spiritual state of being. It is simply doing that translation work with the absolute minimum amount of unnecessary distortion. It's allowing your present architecture to express its actual current state without slapping a heavy filter on it to please a crowd. It's stopping the performance, dropping the mask, and refusing to deny what your power grid is actually doing.
It is the alignment between the authentic internal structure and the outward expression, regardless of whether that internal structure is currently experiencing genius-level flow or heavy cognitive noise.
Wow.
And acknowledging that we are trapped inside our own unseen city leads us to the ultimate, perhaps most humbling takeaway from this entire framework: the epistemological limitation.
That we can never completely step outside our own cognitive architecture.
Ever.
No matter how refined, how educated, or how self-aware our cognition becomes, our view of reality is eternally filtered through our own unique organization of resources.
We are perpetually looking at the universe through our own highly specific pair of glasses, and we cannot ever take them off to see the objective world. And honestly, the brilliance of this model is its intellectual humility. The framework we've been discussing isn't paraded as an absolute objective truth about the universe.
No, not at all.
It is explicitly presented as one person's cognitive architecture attempting to map out a theory of reality using the smallest possible set of assumptions.
It is a theoretical lens. It's just a really useful pair of glasses to put on for a while to see if it brings the messy reality of human behavior into sharper focus.
Exactly.
And for me, it absolutely does. For you listening, the core value of this framework is the realization that you are not a static stat sheet.
Yeah.
You are not a fixed set of numerical abilities stamped on your forehead at birth. You are a dynamic, shifting, beautifully adaptive architecture of finite resources.
And when you view yourself and others as fluid architectures rather than fixed hierarchies, it naturally demands a tremendous amount of empathy.
Absolutely. Your struggles might just be an environmental mismatch. Your anxiety isn't a broken brain. It is just the system running hot as it tries to process a swamp. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your day. Think about that expectation of precise measurement we started with, the desire to neatly rank everyone around us.
Yeah.
If every single interaction you have today is actually just your unseen, beautifully biased cognitive architecture bumping into someone else's unseen, entirely unique architecture, how might that change the way you judge the traffic jams, the struggles, and the unseen brilliance of the people standing right in front of you?